Before watching this video, I recommend you watch Sarcastic Skeptic's video first. Here I will be paraphrasing his arguments and responding accordingly. Going through years of schooling to eventually earn 2 doctorates, organizing his positions in the form of deductive arguments, and arguing for their premises in the form of inference to the best explanation are in fact not a philosophical equivalent of because I said so. Let's look at a few of them then. The Kalam addresses subjects like efficient causality, material causality, creatio ex nihilo nihil fit, mereology, abstract objects, unembodied minds, consciousness, cosmology, cosmogony, quantum mechanics, actual infinites, potential infinites. The moral argument addresses subjects like moral realism, moral anti-realism, the problem of evil, the problem of suffering, free will, naturalism, dualism, epiphenomenalism. The teleological argument addresses subjects like mathematical realism, mathematical anti-realism, the causal relationship of physical reality and mathematical descriptions, possible worlds, cosmological constants, life-permitting ranges, string theory, multiverse models, eternal universe models, cosmogonic theorems. Do any of these seem to have depth comparable to a kiddie pool? No. This is a classic reversal mistake. This is clearly implying that it's a bad thing that Craig gives more or less the same opening statements in all of his debates. It's like saying, I don't like Taylor Swift because all her music sounds the same, or Kenny Chesney, or Nickelback, or, better yet, other debaters like Bart Ehrman, Aaron Ra, Christopher Hitchens. It would admittedly be hard for me to find a debate where Craig does not say the phrase transcendent cause. But would you have any easier a time trying to find a debate where Ehrman doesn't say, it depends on which gospel you read, or Ra saying, faith is belief without evidence by superstitious savages who didn't know anything about anything, or Hitchens saying the word caprice or capricious? Everyone has their talking points. It's not just Craig. Sarcastic Skeptic simply does not like Dr. Craig. That's the only reason he's complaining about Craig using the same arguments in all of his debates. False. Dr. Craig does not run the Kalam argument with only the Christian God in mind. He has stated several times that the Kalam is an argument for broad or general theism. Off the top of my head, I know he says this in the first installment of his tripartite debate in Australia against Lawrence Krauss. More importantly, Craig's claim that the Kalam cause is God is not dubiously drawn. It's something called a conceptual analysis, and this is something that everyone does. It's not a religion thing. The Kalam contends for a cause of space, time, and matter. In order for this cause to be the cause of space, time, and matter, it must be greater than or beyond space, time, and matter. This is common sense. This is part and parcel of the causal principle, and it's not a dubious inference. Now, you can reject it. You can reject the Kalam by all means, but don't misrepresent it. That's the last thing that a skeptic of the Kalam should want to do. If you want to reject the argument, you need to take it seriously, take it for what it actually does contend for, and then fairly refute it. Don't strawman it. That's just going to make it look stronger. Sarcastic Skeptic doesn't seem to grasp the implications of his words. If this line of reasoning does debunk the first premise of the Kalam, then mereological nihilism would be true. That means there would be no composite objects, and that means Sarcastic Skeptic would not exist. Nothing would, other than fundamental particles. If he believes that any composite object has genuine ontological being, then he cannot reject the Kalam's first premise on these grounds. Moreover, this mereological objection neglects the different kinds of causes that Aristotle distinguished over 2,000 years ago. If Sarcastic Skeptic wants to claim that only material causes exist, and efficient causes do not, that's an assertion that he has a burden of proof for. Furthermore, it is not true that we have no idea what a cause of the universe would be like. It's rather easy to apprehend. The only way I can see it as being hard to apprehend is if you come to the table with atheistic precepts. That would be begging the question, using your atheistic precepts to justify why a theistic argument is false. It's correct to say that the Big Bang doesn't prove the universe has a beginning. Science doesn't deal with proofs. Science deals with likelihoods, inference to the best explanation. We form educated guesses in light of the most plausible explanation, and we will hold to that unless and until new data emerges that warrant a change in our understanding. The most likely explanation is that the universe has a beginning. Does this mean we know it? No. Does the lack of certainty mean that it isn't likely? No. And Craig does not claim certainty about the finitude of the past. If he was certain of it, he wouldn't have to make arguments for it. Of course, there are other explanations, like the multiverse or an eternal universe. But every time, and I mean every time, that a skeptic has rejected the beginning of the universe based on these alternatives, they always say something like, for all we know, it could be a multiverse or eternal or both. I've never seen any skeptic show that the multiverse or eternal universe is more likely than a beginning, and I doubt Sarcastic Skeptic would be any different. It took 39 seconds. He just did exactly what I said all skeptics do. He denies the theistic explanation, not based on the plausibility, rather on the possibility of other explanations. The fact that he said a cosmic fart from a goat could be the Kalam cause proves that he's only appealing to mere possibilities. So, Sarcastic Skeptic, take a break from insulting people for the sake of your channel's revenue. Get your hands dirty and do the work. Explain to me how a quantum field is a more likely explanation than a god. Explain how a multiverse is more likely than a god. Don't just project logical possibilities. Tell me why the god explanation isn't likely. And then, once you do that, I'll explain to you that the quantum field explanation doesn't work because 1, it's not a cause. A quantum field is made of nature, so you would be saying nature is the cause of nature. And 2, you'd be equivocating the universe and our mere local universe. Then I'll explain to you that the multiverse explanation doesn't work because 1, there isn't a shred of evidence for it, and 2, it too would be made of nature, so it wouldn't answer the question of what is the cause of nature. False. The word before is a temporal word. It would be incoherent to say something existed before the beginning of time. This is one of the reasons why Craig does not say this. This is not his argument. The word would be beyond, not before. Timeless means beyond time. Moreover, not to move the goalpost, but if the B theory of time is true, which Sarcastic Skeptic would probably accept if he understood physics, then in fact we have observed something timeless. Everything is timeless on the B theory because time is an illusory side effect of gravity. Furthermore, this is a naive understanding of God's creation of the universe. God is timeless, and his decision to create time is simultaneous with the beginning of time. For this to be possible, all we have to do is show that causes and effects can be simultaneous. This is very easy to do. I push a door open. My pushing is the cause, the door opening is the effect. The cause and the effect are simultaneous in this scenario, and I would think that a God could do the same thing. Now, for the next minute or so, he applies similar arguments against spacelessness and immateriality. Overall, his problem is his failure to understand the causal principle. The causal principle necessitates that causes transcend their effects. Again, reject the Kalam for all I care. You have free will, do what you want. But for the sake of intellect and honesty, don't reject an argument due to fallacious reasoning. And don't pretend that a hateful mockery of a philosopher is a sufficient refutation of any of the arguments that philosopher might make. False. For 2 reasons. 1, the Kalam is not a Christian argument. It is an argument for broad theism. And 2, the biblical interpretation of God being a material, time-bound person is ultimately known as literalism. Literalism fails as a hermeneutic because it neglects all the other types of writing that compose the Bible. The Bible does contain literal writings. It also has writings that are metaphorical. Some parts of it are poetry. Some parts of it are apocalyptically prophetic. When Sarcastic Skeptic says the Bible depicts God as a physical person because he walks around in the garden, or he regrets creating humans, or he changes his mind, this is like saying Jesus was a literal block of wood with hinges just because he says, "I am the door," in the Gospel of John. God does not literally regret his decisions. The verse in Genesis that says God regrets is an example of human beings using their limited linguistics to try to describe an omni-God. Even if it were true that some of the Bible writers did believe that God was a time-bound agent who could actively regret, this only debunks Craig's position if he is a proponent of biblical inerrancy. But who said the Bible is inerrant? Craig has never said that in any of his debates against atheists, and he certainly never said that in any of his debates about the Kalam, least of which because the Kalam has nothing to do with the Bible. It could have errors for all I care. That doesn't determine whether or not Jesus rose from the dead, and it definitely doesn't determine anything about the Kalam argument. I already suggested you should watch Sarcastic Skeptic's video before watching mine, but I'll suggest it again here. Fact check me and see if I'm misrepresenting his words. His video is not a refutation, or educational, or a good-hearted appeal to the truth. This is an ugly and hateful diatribe. I'll admit I'm making an assumption here, but I'm almost certain that I've watched more Dr. Craig debates than Sarcastic Skeptic has, and I can't recall any instance in which Craig has flagrantly used the term contingent. I would love to be proven wrong on this, by the way, if anyone knows of a time where Craig has overused the word contingent specifically, please let me know. Regarding this idea that Craig overwhelms his debate opponents with a barrage of arguments, this is simply false. In most of his debates, he gives 5 arguments. They are usually the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, the resurrection, and then the claim that God is a philosophical, properly basic belief. The 5th one isn't even an argument, and Craig says this in all of his debates. So is Sarcastic Skeptic saying that these top-tier scholarly atheist debaters get overwhelmed by just 4 arguments? If so, that seems like an atheist problem to me. To be frank, I don't really care about the Hawking part. I'm so glad he mentioned Alex Vilenkin. Craig and Vilenkin actually know each other. They have talked to each other. Vilenkin has told Craig, person to person, that the universe has a beginning. Even more than that, Vilenkin said to Craig that even in the case that we discover a quantum region prior to the Planck time, even then the universe would have a beginning. Aside from that, here is a host of quotes by Vilenkin where he says the universe has a beginning. All of these quotes are in context. Don't give me that quote mine excuse. That's a weak excuse people pull when they don't want to justify their faith positions. This is the classic lie that many atheists tell about the moral argument. Dr. Craig has never argued that you have to be a theist in order to be moral. When Sarcastic Skeptic says that people have empathy and kindness and fairness independent of a belief in God, he's talking about epistemology. In contrast, Craig's moral argument deals with ontology. In the Bible itself, in Romans 2:15, the Apostle Paul says human beings have the moral law written on their hearts. Paul doesn't say that morality comes from God because he wrote it in a book. He says the opposite. He says that the Gentiles know morality despite the fact that they don't have the Jews' holy scriptures. So congrats to Sarcastic Skeptic for agreeing with the Bible here. I could address in detail all of these passages, perhaps in another video someday. For here, I will say that this too is a tired argument, so let's quickly go through it. 1. Objective morality does not exist if God does not exist. Therefore, if God does not exist, nothing in the Bible can be objectively moral or immoral. 2. This is an internal critique of the Bible, so I can go to Romans 9:20, which says, "Who are you, you foolish person? Who answers back to God?" Long story short, God does what he wants. You don't tell God what's right or wrong, deal with it. This is called divine command theory in philosophical terms. And 3, these alleged moral atrocities in the Old Testament are really only compelling if you think biblical inerrancy is central to the Christian faith. Since this is not a central tenet, this internal critique is rendered obsolete. What does it mean to say that there is no evidence for the empty tomb? Is it not considered evidence when we have 4 first-century independent sources that affirm the event? I feel like at best you can argue that the evidence is bad. I don't see how you can say there is 0 evidence. We also have the majority of New Testament scholars, which includes atheistic scholars, who uphold that the empty tomb is a fact of history. The Gospels contradict each other. Great. First of all, probably not as much as you think they do. A lot of these Ehrman-esque contradictions are contrived, and the Christian can easily explain them. Second, and most importantly, do any of the contradictions apply to the central tenets of the resurrection of Jesus? No. Aside from the fact that Bart Ehrman and Bruce Metzger both agree that this is the case, all of the Gospels and Acts and Paul's epistles say that Jesus existed, performed miracles, died on the cross, rose from the dead, ascended into heaven, and that through his blood shed on the cross we can be saved from our sins. I've always found this argument to be strange. At what point did any proponent of the fine-tuning argument deny that 99% of the universe is hostile toward life? This has nothing to do with the fine-tuning argument. The fine-tuning argument addresses the initial conditions at the inception of the universe. It is these initial conditions that, if infinitesimally different, life would be impossible in the universe. Fine-tuning simply means that the life-permitting range is vastly smaller than the number of total possible universes. That's all the argument says, and this is an objective fact. Some skeptics try to escape this by saying, well, we don't really know what constitutes life, therefore we can't say what the life-permitting range is. My answer to that is, life is most generally defined as a system capable of self-sustaining processes like metabolism, growth, reproduction, and response to stimuli. Life as defined in this most basic way is still vastly less probable than not in light of all of the possible worlds. To wrap up this video, a lot of what's said here is correct. You don't have to be a theist in order to like tacos or sunsets or TV shows. That is not Craig's argument. Craig's argument is that if God does not exist, there is no objective or intrinsic meaning to life. If God does not exist and naturalism is true, then we are just byproducts of an irrational constitution of fundamental particles that does not care and is not even capable of caring about whether we live or die or what we do while we are alive. If God doesn't exist, we're all going to die. The universe itself will die at the big freeze, and none of it ultimately matters. That's the argument. And the fact that you like tacos and Steve Carell doesn't address that argument. And finally, none, literally none, of Dr. Craig's arguments are God of the gaps. They are deductive arguments in which their conclusions follow from the premises with logical necessity, with said premises being contended for via inference to the best explanation. His arguments are based on what we do know, not on what we don't know, and that, by definition, is not God of the gaps. Thanks for watching. Until next time, God bless.